Nia thought she was only having fun when she laughed at Mama Kona in the dusty Kijani market, but that single jeer, caught on a vendor's phone, spread like fire. People watched the clip again and again, then the town began to change. Nia's best crops woke one morning brown and brittle. Her newborn calf lay cold in the yard. Little accidents followed that looked like bad luck until everyone started whispering Mama Kona's name and the words dead of laughter. Nia tried to shrug it off, but at dawn she saw two of herself in the river and the double would not stop following her. A comb broke at a wedding, a pot of stew boiled over at an important feast, and each small shame felt like another coin added to a growing debt. Her brother Kofi rallied the young to mock Mama Kona, but a strange fog rolled into the square and people fell sick. Guilt crept in like winter. Nia went into the forest to find the woman she had humiliated and learned the price was not hurt but truth. To lift the curse she had to stand in the market and tell everything she had hidden. When she confessed, the town unraveled secrets and old wounds began to heal. The people she had hurt slowly found their dignity again. In the end, Nia led a humble ceremony at sunrise and the barren hill above the town burst into green. The clip that began it all became a lesson people shared for years. Nia woke before dawn because she could not sleep, but she had no idea the day would turn her world upside down. She walked out to the field where her best maize stood tall the night before and found it brown and dry as if a frost had passed in the heat of the night. The leaves crinkled under her hand and the ears hung empty, light as paper. She ran back to the yard and the calf, born just 3 days earlier, lay on its side with its breathing shallow and small. By the time she reached it the calf was already cold. Nia knelt and felt the hollow ache that comes when something you love is gone. Word spread before she could cry, someone had filmed her laughing at Mama Kona and the clip was everywhere. People pointed when she walked through the market. Tano, who sold tomatoes by the stall near hers, lowered his voice and said Mama Kona had warned her of a debt of laughter. Bintu, who braided hair at the end of the row, would not meet Nia's eyes and muttered that bad laughter calls bad luck. At the well, women shook their heads and folded their hands over their mouths. Nia wanted to shout that it was just a joke, that she had only teased an old woman, but the picture of the calf's limp body and the ruined maize would not let her. Pride rose in her chest like a wall. She had been laughed at before and had learned to stand tall, not to bow to superstition. That pride told her to ignore the whispers, to go on with her life, to act as if the clip and the curses and the gossip were not changing anything. But every time she closed her eyes the market jeer played back and the baby's last breath echoed. Nights grew heavy with silence, and during the day people kept their distance. Even Kofi, who laughed with her, avoided her, embarrassed, not knowing what else to do. The choice sat in Nia like a stone. She could cling to her pride and wait for the world to move on, pretending nothing had happened, or she could swallow the sharp taste of shame and seek out the woman she had humiliated. Visiting Mama Kona felt like stepping into a story she had never wanted to be part of, yet every sight and whisper pushed her forward. The town's eyes, the broken crops, the empty place where the calf had been, they all pressed on her until pride felt thin and worn. By the third morning, when Bintu crossed the market and touched Nia's arm lightly, saying only that Mama Kona might help if Nia was brave enough to ask, Nia realized the choice was no longer theoretical. Pride would keep her angry and alone, asking for help might be humbling, but it might also give her a chance to bring back what was lost. Nia woke before dawn and went to the river to wash her face, the way she always did, but the water showed more than her tired eyes. For a moment she thought she saw someone else standing beside her, a second Nia with the same tired lines and the same stubborn set to the jaw. The reflection did not blink when she blinked. It split like a crack in glass and stayed there, looking back at her with a small, patient smile. She stepped away and the double stayed in the water, as if it had its own feet and followed her into the day. At first the double did small things that felt like bad luck. A wooden comb Kofi had saved for his sister for the wedding snapped in her hand when she tried to fix her hair. The bride was crying because the comb broke in the middle of the ceremony. Later, the stew that had taken her mother hours to cook for a dowry feast boiled dry and burned, filling the house with smoke and shame. Plates were ruined. Words were said. Someone noticed the double in the river and whispered that the two of her were now out walking in the town. The accidents piled up, a market jar smashed as she opened a crate, a child's ribbon pulled loose at a naming, a letter torn in half and read by the wrong person. Each small thing pushed the family further from their place in the village. Neighbors who used to greet them crossed to the other side of the road. Kofi tried to hide his anger by joking, but his jokes turned thin and brittle. Her mother stayed inside more and more, folding her hands and speaking quietly to the pictures on the wall. People began to point without speaking. They said the family had been cursed. They counted the mishaps like coins dropped into a deep jar. Shame began to grow like a shadow at the edge of their home. Nia felt it settle on her shoulders and move down to her children and her parents. Where she had been proud and loud, now she kept her head down and walked fast so she would not meet anyone's face. The double would show up at the worst moments. It would smile as a ribbon fell off a little girl, and it would look away when a skillful mat collapsed under the weight of market goods. Once, when Kofi lost a small sum of money, the double stood in the river and laughed without sound. The family tried to fix the damage with work and coins, but the stitches never held. Every broken comb and every ruined pot felt like proof that something from that morning in the market had returned to claim more than laughter. It wanted to turn small slips into a story about who they were, and the town began to tell that story in low voices, until pride and patience frayed and the family found themselves standing on the edge of losing everything they thought they could keep. The elders began to press on Nia like a slow, steady wind, telling her that the town noticed the pattern and that some things must be fixed in the old way. They sat on low stools beneath the mango tree and spoke in calm, tired tones about respect, about how words carry weight, and about paying debts to the spirits. Nia's face burned every time they spoke. She wanted to stand up and say it was only a joke, that she had not meant harm, that people were making too much of a small thing. Kofi heard none of that. He was young and loud and angry that his sister and his family were shrinking under the town's gaze. He thought the best answer was to prove Mama Kona was the problem. So Kofi and a few other young men marched to the market one morning with drums and shouts and a stick with a rag tied to it, a simple sign of shame. They pulled Mama Kona from her corner and began to mock her the way Nia had. The crowd first laughed like a tide. People who had watched the viral clip felt they had a right to join in. Old insults came out and new ones were made. Mama Kona stood small and still as if every word laid another weight upon her. Then, like a sudden breath, a gray fog rolled in. It moved through the traders and the drums as if it had a mind. The laughter choked and died. People began to cough and put hands to their chests. Some grabbed their heads as if a loud noise lived inside them. Mothers scooped up children and ran toward the shade. Kofi tried to pull his friends back but his arms slid through the fog as if through smoke. The elders reached out and called for water and blankets. Several folks grew weak and pale, fainting in the dust. The market, once noisy and bright, became a place of low voices and frightened faces. Fingers pointed at Kofi and at Nia and then at Mama Kona. Guilt filled Nia like cold water. She remembered the way she had laughed into her friend's phone as if the clip meant nothing. She felt the town's hurt as if it were her own skin being pinched. The elders said this was not just bad luck. They said it was a sign that the community had a debt to pay and that pride had led them into taking the easy way out. Nia looked at Kofi and saw fear instead of courage. She thought of her mother folding her hands at home and of the calf that had died in the yard. Something in her changed from anger to a kind of clear shame that made her straighten. For the first time she could see that mocking another person had a cost not just to the mocked but to everyone who joined in. The fog lingered until dusk and people whispered of remedies and of old rules to follow when balance is broken. That night Nia could not sleep. The town's anger had turned inward and the sound of drums seemed suddenly small and cruel. She understood then that her choice would not only fix her own wrongs or her family's losses. It would mean facing tradition, some of it good and some of it harsh, and deciding whether to hold her pride or to help the town heal. Night had a different sound after the fog, thin and full of whispering leaves, so Nia waited until the market lanterns blinked out before she slipped away. She moved through the sleeping houses with her heart thudding like a drum, holding the memory of the calves' last breath and the taste of the town's cold looks. The path to the forest was narrow and smelled of wet earth and crushed grass. Every shadow looked like a face. When her foot caught on a root she thought of her mother's hands and how small they had seemed lately, how proud and tired they were. Nia told herself she would not beg, that she would stand straight and ask for what she needed, but the closer she came to where Mama Kona lived under the deep trees, the heavier her chest became. The forest itself seemed to watch. Stars hid behind leaves and the moon sent thin silver fingers between the branches. She found Mama Kona by a ring of old stones, sitting as if she had always been part of the place, wrapped in a cloth that had known many rains. The woman's face was a map of long years, her eyes were soft but they held a long sorrow that made Nia's throat burn. Nia had expected a witch to hiss and point a finger, but instead Mama Kona spoke in a voice that was no louder than the wind. She had lost children, she had been shamed and chased, and she had learned that people can carry pain like stones until they drop them in the wrong places. She told Nia the truth, the world keeps books no one sees, and laughter that kills pride is a debt the living must repay. Then Mama Kona offered Nia a terrible choice. One path was clear and sharp, sacrifice what she loved most. It could bring back the calf, the crops, the smooth days, but the price would be heavy and immediate, something living and dear would be taken to settle the debt. The other path was slow and rough. Learn humility by serving the village, by naming her faults in the market, by taking on the small, thankless tasks others had once done for her family, and so undo the harm by change rather than through loss. Mama Kona did not sugarcoat either way. She said the town would watch, that some would forgive and some would not, that the work would sting like nettles and take time. Nia felt the world narrow to the pulse in her neck. She thought of the calf's warm head against her knee, of the way children used to run to her stall for sweets, of Kofi's laugh that now sounded empty. She also saw her mother's bowed shoulders and the neighbors' eyes when they crossed the road. The sacrifice path whispered of quick healing but at a cost that might hollow her heart. The service path promised slow repair and a new kind of strength that would not be taken away, only earned. The forest held its breath as Nia chose, and for the first time since the clip spread, she understood that repair might mean losing who she had been so she could become someone the village could trust again. Nia chose the slow hard road of service, but Mama Kona's price was not a wound or a coin. It was truth. The old woman told her to stand in the village square at dawn and say every single thing she had hidden. Nia felt her stomach roll when she heard the words. Speaking private betrayals felt worse than cutting her hand. Still, she agreed and spent the night unable to sleep, going over everything in her head as if counting stones. At first the square filled with a few curious faces and the merchants who were starting their stalls. Then neighbors arrived, and by the time the sun lifted the dust, the whole town crowded around. Nia's voice shook as she began. She told them about the small lies that had seemed harmless. She spoke of the favors she had accepted and never returned. She named the times she took credit for work she did not do and the moments she laughed at others behind their backs. She said the harsh things she had whispered to keep herself above shame. Each sentence cut a little more of the life she had known. People gasped. Some covered their mouths. Others stared as if they had been hit. Her mother cried openly. Kofi turned his face away. Those who had been hurt by her words or actions stepped forward and told new truths that joined hers, and the square became a place where secret debts were shown like coins on a table. The first days were worse than any curse. Friends left, whispers grew into scorn, and Nia's stall lost its best customers. That loss felt like cold wind. Yet slowly something else began to happen. When each confession landed, a small thing shifted. A neighbor who had kept a grudge admitted they had lied also. A family that had judged her found itself exposed. Hidden cruelties that had fed the town's quiet resentments came to light and could be cleaned. The ripple of truth cut through the fog that had seemed to stick to the market. Mama Kona watched without cheer. She showed Nia how truth was a kind of medicine that stung but healed when people took it together. The shame did not vanish overnight. It wrapped around Nia for weeks and sometimes felt like fire. But the accidents slowed. The broken combs happened less often. People started to trade again with her mother. Some who left returned to listen, to ask questions, and to accept apologies. The village began to stitch itself in small ways. Nia learned how to sit in silence when someone else spoke. She learned to do the quiet work no one saw and to offer help without waiting for thanks. The curse's hold loosened as the town owned its part in the harm and began to repay debts of many kinds. By the time the market's dust settled, Nia had lost more than she thought she could lose. She had also grown a steadier kind of strength. The truth had torn her life into pieces and then handed her the tools to rebuild it. Truth moved through the market like a slow rain, and when it landed it began to wash things clean in ways Nia had not expected. People who had been hurt by her found space to speak, and as their pain came out, so did old wrongs that had nothing to do with her. Juma, the man who had always tried to undercut Nia's stall, stepped forward and admitted how he had spread rumors to steal her customers. The shame loosened from his shoulders when people learned the whole story and he was able to fix some of the harm he had done. The young bride who had been humiliated when the wedding comb broke found a voice in the square and told what had truly happened. Neighbors who had turned away from her before started to help, bringing food and mending torn cloth. Small restitutions followed. A neighbor returned a borrowed goat, a mother apologized for gossip that had cost another woman her work, and a child who had been laughed at was welcomed back into games. All of this did not make Nia powerful again. Her own standing in the town fell hard. Old friends kept their distance, and some people would not speak with her for a long time. The stall lost its best days and money grew scarce. That loss was sharp and real, but it taught her to listen in a way she never had. Where she had once been quick to laugh, she learned to stay quiet until she understood. Where she had once taken a side, she began to look for what the weaker person needed. Her suffering made room in her heart for other people's pain, and that space filled with work instead of pride. Mama Kona watched and, when she needed help for her grandchildren, she found Nia standing ready. The children were small, shy, and hungry for steadiness. Nia sat with them while their grandmother gathered herbs, she went to fetch water and firewood without asking for thanks, and she taught the older ones how to mend nets and tie a proper knot. In doing this plain work, Nia became their protector not by force but by care. The market, which had once cheered when she mocked, began to notice that the woman who had caused a storm was now the one who held an umbrella over two little backs. People who had been angry at Mama Kona for years watched Nia mend a ripped dress or pay for a lesson and felt something move inside them. Respect, slow and cautious, grew where scorn had been. It was not a clean victory. Nia still walked with the memory of the calf and the fog and the prices paid, and some mornings the old shame rose hot in her chest. But when a neighbor's child fell and Nia ran without thinking, people saw the change. Her fall from grace had made room for a steadier courage, the kind that does not need an audience. In time the town spoke Mama Kona's name without spitting, and they called Nia by a quieter name, the one that belonged to someone who had learned how to hold other people's hurts until they could be set down together. At dawn the whole town gathered on the dusty slope, more out of curiosity than belief, and Nia stood before them with her hands empty and her voice steady. She had spent weeks doing the small work no one saw, and now she read aloud the promises she would keep, to return what was owed, to help the hungry, to teach the children, to sit when others needed a listener. People listened at first with folded arms and soft mutters, but as the sun climbed a pale gold across the ridge, a hush fell that felt like the moment before rain. Mama Kona came forward and blessed the words with a slow nod. Then, as if the earth itself had been waiting for someone to speak honestly, a green began to move up the barren hill above the market. At first it was only a hint, a darkening of the soil, and then shoots pushed through dry dirt like fingers finding air. By morning the slope that had been brown and hard a week earlier was soft with grass and small wildflowers. Neighbors stared, mouths open, and the skeptics who had laughed at the market clip stood very still. Someone pulled out their phone and the video began to travel again, but this time it showed a hill that had bloomed overnight. Stories spread from village to village. People spoke Mama Kona's name with a new softness, thankful and afraid at the same time. They spoke of Nia as the woman who had fallen and then used her fall to hold others up. Traders who had once crossed the road came back with baskets and a quiet respect. The miracle did not fix everything. Some wounds needed time, and some grudges held on. But the green hill became a sign that change was possible when someone chose truth over pride. Nia no longer needed the loud laugh that once made her feel big. She had become a guardian in a small, steady way, and the clip that had started the trouble now traveled as a lesson people told their children about kindness, truth, and the risk it takes to make things right.